Thank you, Dr. Chang, for making this time to speak with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So growing up, before entering college, were you in one place? Did you move around a lot? I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal backgrounds.
Yeah, sure. I mostly grew up in Colorado, in suburbs of Denver. We moved around the country a little bit when I was younger, but I spent most of my childhood and adolescence in Colorado. Um, I my family is like very involved in the medical profession in different ways, and so through their careers, my parents were really involved in like setting up, kind of like merging their interests with their career, like kind of their hobbies with their career. So they'd set up like a ski program for disabled kids that my sister and I were involved with growing up, and a summer camp for disabled kids that we were also involved with, and I was like a counselor with through college. So it was kind of like having like interests and career were always kind of intertwined. So that was what I was kind of exposed to growing up, which was really nice. And I think something I still really follow a lot today. Um, I was also involved. I was a competitive skier when I was younger, and then also I played violin in a symphony, so I was really in music, and I was always kind of had a foot in two different worlds of like school and then doing these other completely different lives where a lot of the people I was working with or competing with like were doing it full time. And then basically, I think all those types of things you just learn to like work in different contexts and deal with different types of people all the time. But um, yeah, for example, my skiing experiences, I used to do competitive freestyle skiing, and this was before people wore helmets, and a lot of my friends in high school ended up getting head injuries from just bonking their head from doing flips and stuff. And then when I was later in life, when I was working in these psychiatric inpatient units, I would come across kids with conduct disorder, I noticed there was a lot of like similarities between their behaviors with people presenting with psychopathy and with frontal brain damage. That's actually what got me interested in this decision-making emotion in the brain in the first place. So trying to understand like what happened and why, and why people seemed seemingly normal and could do certain things, but really struggled in others.
I'm hearing a lot of overlap between your own personal life and professional interests, and you had articulated that your parents always did this kind of blending together of personal and professional. So what do you think are some of the benefits of that approach, but what might also be some of the challenges if you don't have clear compartments or areas for, this is my professional life and this is my personal life?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I feel incredibly fortunate to basically get to do something that I like love. I feel like not everyone now and the history of humanity really has had that luxury. So I feel incredibly privileged to have that. And one thing, when you like love what you do, you don't really want to stop. So it kind of consumes you in different ways, and you keep thinking about it and getting excited about it and thinking of new ideas. Through my like learning trajectory, I got really excited about programming and computers much later, and like after college, and self-taught myself that and math and statistics. And so those end up kind of becoming hobbies that, so that's stuff I do for fun, is like, writing software, or like learning new statistical methods. And that's part of my job, but it's something I kind of treat more as a hobby than like my real job. And so the hobbies and professional stuff all kind of intertwine. And so the advantage, I think, for the career is that if you can find a way to merge those things, you're essentially bringing like everything becomes more interesting and innovative because you're mixing different parts of your life and interests together. But then on the other hand, it's hard to separate your life from what your job and what you do, and your identity from your career. And I think especially in academia, where there's not a clear start and stop to your day and your work week, or if there's a vacation or not, it's easy to kind of let that take over if you don't set pretty clear boundaries about how much you're going to work and when you're going to work, and who you're going to spend time with. And so I think that stuff gets really challenging.
For those who are watching this interview and may not know what the life of an academic looks like, can you talk a little bit about the different roles you have? So research, teaching, all of those different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one really nice thing about academic life is it's very diverse in the types of things you do, and you have a lot of autonomy in how you can spend your time. So I spend part of my time teaching. I also have the luxury of being able to kind of create any type of course that I want to teach, which is really fun. So I get to be creative in that regard, and then try to find kind of innovative ways to teach, and also topics that people might be excited about that they wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. That's like actually a very small percentage of my time. I also have a laboratory I run that has, I think I have maybe about 5 or 6 graduate students and a couple of postdocs, and then lots of research assistants. So that, how I treat that, it's like almost like running like a small startup, where you know, some people give you some venture capital money, and then you're trying to basically make some products which are different research ideas, and then sell those to get federal funding, so you can kind of secure funding and keeping all your work going. So you're doing a lot of project management, innovating, you're doing marketing, pretty much everything that a small business would be doing is all in one, which is pretty daunting, but also really fun and exciting. And then through that, part of like my marketing is I go and give talks a lot around the country and world. So I get to travel a lot to conferences, meet people. I get to visit different universities and see like what life's like there, and learn from them, and then share stuff we're doing. And then I also do different types of like service activities. So some of them are like things specifically at the college I'm at, where it's about trying to make the program better, or innovating in what our majors like, or things at the university level. And then I also try to do service at like a larger community, for our larger academic community. So trying to create teaching materials and new ways to learn, like how to do advanced statistics and programming. And then in our lab that we also innovate a lot of methods, both hardware and software. And so there's also kind of like an engineering hat that I would wear part of the time, where we're writing code and actually building things that we can try to like use to measure things about social interactions or emotions. So in our research too. So it's basically every job that I ever wanted to do when I was younger, it's all rolled into one, where I get to travel, meet with people, mentor. Even though I'm not doing direct clinical work anymore, like being in a mentoring role for lots of people, different levels from undergraduates to postdoc, a lot of those skills come into play too. So I never feel like I miss out on that at all.
When you first started conducting research and doing the kind of research you wanted to do, if you compare that to where you are now, how is your life similar or different? Is being a researcher what you expected? Is it drastically different from that? Does it change daily?
So in college, I kind of bounced around different majors trying to find something I was interested in, and ended up on psychology because I was interested in the questions, but I didn't really get like the science part of it until I did a senior thesis, and that it really like made it come to life, where I'm like, oh, now I get like, we're asking these questions, but we can't answer them. It's complicated in how you answer. You have to find a way to set up an experiment, to test it in the dependent measure and all that, and then have statistics. And then all of a sudden, all these papers I was reading started making a lot more sense, and the whys, and also why they were never showing as strongly as the things that we want to show. And I always found it frustrating to read in the beginning. So just the thesis alone got me really excited about it. And then I didn't do a lot of research for a while, and then during my master's, I got involved with this lab that was doing functional magnetic brain imaging, and that got me really excited about it. And I wanted to know everything about it. So I was like, I was just rushing to learn enough so I could actually run my first analysis. And then I did that, and then I realized I didn't know anything about the brains. You see all these like blobs on there, and I didn't understand what it meant. So then I realized I had to learn a lot more. So it was kind of going back and forth. But the idea of like getting really excited about questions you came up with, and then trying to figure out you're going to be the first person in the world to be able to answer it, and know and be able to tell people about it, and determine like how people are going to think about this question or problem, was like so exciting. I think from when I was an undergrad to even when I was in graduate school, and it's something that I still have a lot today, that I'm like really excited. And I liked our research. I like to be on the area where we don't really ever know what the answer is going to be. It could go lots of different ways, and so it's really fun. And there's this kind of uncertainty and anticipation about what you're going to find when you build this stuff and then test it and see. And it sometimes it goes as you expect, and most of the time it doesn't. And that's part of like the ride that's really fun. I would say the things that are the same as when I started and got excited about research are feeling like I never really was smart enough or knew what was going on or had enough knowledge to be like an expert in an area. That's definitely how I felt in the beginning and all the way through, and continue to feel to this day. And partly it's because of course, you're always learning and getting better, but I think if you're really curious, you're always pushing yourself further into an area of unknown, which is, so you can never really feel like you're an expert, because as soon as you feel like an expert something, you want to go further in something that isn't known. And then so you're always kind of in this area where you just don't feel very smart, and like, what's going on. And a lot of people find that kind of unsettling, and like they just don't feel good about it. And I personally kind of like thrive in that environment where I just like, I kind of always love not kind of knowing what's going on and getting excited to figure it out. It's just the act of learning I find really enjoyable. The other parts about research that I didn't expect are, let's see, so there's this whole enterprise of research, and like when I was learning about it, I was just learning about how to do an experiment, ask a question and do an experiment and test it, and then you write it up and then share it. But I didn't realize there's like all these other parts of it until much later in my career. So there's the funding parts, or some types of research is really expensive and you have to fund that. I didn't realize that if you want to ask certain questions, at some point there's no longer going to be an expert that you can ask, or there's not going to be a software that you can use, or like hardware that's available that you can buy. Like you're going to have to create it yourself so you can carve your own path. But that also makes it scarier in some ways if you don't kind of have the confidence you're going to be able to figure it out. The other thing is I didn't realize, and I kind of still find it not my favorite part of the job, of having to like sell what you do to other people and get them to be excited about it and understand it. I always have this kind of romantic notion that science, it's like this purity where you're kind of seeking the truth and other people are going to figure out and interpret it and make sense of it and figure out why it's important. But it turns out that's actually not true. People will do that, but even for them to do that, you have to be doing most of that yourself and explaining to people what's important about it, why they should care. And so there's this like kind of outreach marketing thing of having to sell your stuff to funding and to other scientists and then to the general public to support what you're doing, that is, I find to be particularly challenging, but it's a really important part of the job that I didn't really realize.
Do you find that that's something that holds true for research, where oftentimes the original question or road that you're traveling might suddenly diverge into lots of different pathways or opportunities?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's the nature of the game in a lot of ways, is being able to roll with the punches and make the best of like what you have, and then trying to figure out what it means and why it's important. And maybe it isn't important, it means nothing. Like that could be very well be true, but trying to figure that out. And it might be important for reasons that you didn't initially anticipate, and the finding might have changed depending on what you were trying to study. And then you have to find a way to figure out what the value of it is, or what it means, and why anyone should care about it. And that's like really, I think, part of the job of being a scientist. But it also means you have to be very flexible. So it's really easy, and I think in psychology and different areas at different points in time have really fallen into this trap where you get really seduced by an idea and you want it to be true so much, and then so you try to design experiments to show that it's true, and then you kind of only look at confirmation of that it's true, and you ignore, or you kind of minimize things that are inconsistent with it. And especially if you have a theory, you're trying to find all this evidence to support it. But you can have blinders on sometimes, and then I think it kind of can almost stifle the progression of science in a lot of ways if you take that too seriously. And if you're too flexible, then you can never really accumulate a bunch of findings into a theory too. So I think there's problems on both sides of it. Yeah, but yeah, for sure, I think one of the fun things about the roller coaster ride of science is that you don't really know what's going to happen, and it's never what you expect. And sometimes it far exceeds anything expected, and sometimes it's far beyond it. And it's always a lesson in humility and frustration, which is fun.
So one of the questions that I'm wondering about is, how does your own personal identity influence how you do your work, or how you approach it, maybe some of the day-to-day things?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I'm half Chinese, so Asian American. My father is Chinese and my mother is Caucasian. And growing up, that's always been part of my identity, of like kind of being like a foot in two different worlds. So for better or worse, right? So sometimes it's like, oh, I get to be part of this community, I get to be part of this community, but then I'm also neither part of neither, because I'm not fully Chinese or fully Caucasian. And so you never quite feel like you fit in one way, but you kind of get to see these different worldviews all the time. And so that's kind of always been a part of my life. And the people I really connect with and identify with are ones who sit in different worlds. So whether it's because they're also, like biracial, or because their interests are such that they're like combining these two different worlds, and it's also kind of like what got me really interested in why I've really pursued this interdisciplinary stuff. Things along the way that I didn't really expect are that not everybody like looks like you, and definitely not everybody has the same experiences, and that's just true no matter what. But I think when you're in this this kind of like biracial side, it's even more true, and especially I think being Asian American in psychology, it's an interesting experience. So my family there are a lot of them are in the healthcare industry, and they were all like, I would say, disappointed that I didn't want to pursue medicine, because that's what they felt passionate about and thought was really they valued a lot, and they just assumed I would follow in those footsteps. And there's also my family who aren't in the medical profession, especially on the Asian side, they're all engineers. And so there was also like a lot of like, of all the things you're going to pick, if it's not medicine or engineering, why did you pick psychology? And so it's not something that they really saw the value of, because they had this kind of stereotype in their head from media about what it is. And they didn't really know about the scientific aspect of it. So I always felt kind of like a second class citizen, no matter what, like if you're by your racial identity or by what you're trying to pursue in your career for your family's stuff. And then it turns out that I'm not the only one that has this sort of experience. And so a lot of people who grew up in a similar way, they often end up in like different STEM disciplines in undergrad, and they're not in psychology, and they're pursuing those types of paths, either being science or engineering or medicine. And so it turns out, even by the NSF statistics, that Asian Americans are almost the most underrepresented in the field of psychology of all different races, which I didn't understand. In fact, the year I got my PhD, there was apparently only 50 males in the US that got, Asian males that got PhDs in psychology, which is, I could not actually believe that was true. So it's something I never really like thought about much. And, but along the way, like I found it to be interesting, because a lot of student undergrads, they're like, oh, well, my parents really want me to pursue medicine or engineering or things, because that's where all the really good jobs are. And especially like first generation college students, they have these really strong pressures. And it turns out that it's really competitive to do these STEM classes and the pre-med classes, and they feel like they might have done really well in high school, but then all of a sudden they're really struggling because it's this whole other game of people who are really pushing towards this. And then they start feeling bad and like it's the wrong choice, and like they're not excited about it. And they didn't really maybe want to do it in the first place. They didn't really know, because that's just what they were, the whole narrative was built around about going to college and becoming a doctor. And so I found it to be really important for people when they're kind of in this part where they're struggling with what's going on and what they should be doing, and to be able to get excited about things and find other paths like psychology or other types of things that might lead to an academic path, or it might lead to some other type of career. But finding people to talk to and about that, and kind of nurture those your interest and give you confidence that you might want to pursue them, I think has been really important. And I've had people do that for me, and then I really enjoy doing that for others as well.
Well, it's an interesting parallel to your research on emotions and how people will interpret things very differently based on their own experiences, expectations, etc.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like, I'm not sure I ever like consciously made that connection or made those decisions, but I think if these things are happening and they're part of your life and you're pursuing things you're interested in that are relevant for you, I think it just naturally ends up being that way, that these experiences shape what you're doing and how you do it in some way or another.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me and interviewing me for this.